When a starship from another universe tore through the fabric of space above an occupied world, it carried with it something the Empire had spent decades trying to destroy: the unshakable conviction that tyranny could be defied. Captain Kirk found himself standing before Grand Admiral Thrawn, a predator wrapped in white who saw every move 3 steps before it happened, whose fleets had crushed rebellion after rebellion with surgical precision. But Kirk had faced empires before, and he knew that brilliant tyrants all shared one fatal flaw: they believed fear was stronger than the will to be free. As the Enterprise's crew raced to repair their crippled ship, while rebel cells watched from the shadows, one question burned across Lothal like wildfire. Could a captain who had never known the Force teach a galaxy in chains how to hope again? The void between stars was never meant to be bridged. In the galaxy far, far away, the hyperspace lanes carried the traffic of 1,000,000 worlds, each journey mapped by ancient Jedi navigators who had listened to the Force and charted paths through the impossible geometry of light speed. But there were other voids, other dimensions where different laws held sway, and when those barriers weakened, when reality itself grew thin, the unthinkable could occur. Above the planet Lothal, in the 2nd year of the Emperor's reign, space tore open like a wound, and something foreign emerged into a universe that had never known its kind. The spatial rift burned violet and gold, colors that did not belong to any nebula or stellar phenomenon recorded in Imperial archives. It pulsed once, twice, and then vomited forth a vessel of smooth white hull and elegant nacelles, a ship bearing no resemblance to the angular wedges of star destroyers or the curved surfaces of Mon Calamari cruisers. The USS Enterprise tumbled from the impossible aperture, her shields flaring as they struggled to compensate for gravimetric forces that should not exist, and behind her the rift collapsed with a flash that registered on every sensor from Lothal to the outer rim. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Captain James Tiberius Kirk gripped the arms of his command chair as the ship's inertial dampeners fought to stabilize the deck beneath his feet. The view screen showed a planet, arid and brown, ringed by a debris field that might once have been industrial satellites. Beyond it, hanging in the black like a dagger, was a ship larger than anything Kirk had encountered outside of a doomsday weapon, its surface bristling with weapons, batteries, and tractor beam projectors. The vessel was a study in brutal efficiency, every line designed to project power and intimidation, and Kirk felt his tactical instincts sharpen as he catalogued firing arcs and structural weaknesses. "Report," Kirk said, his voice cutting through the chaos of damage alerts and confused exclamations from his crew. Spock straightened from his science station, one eyebrow raised in an expression that Kirk had learned to interpret as profound concern masked by Vulcan composure. "Captain, our sensors indicate we are no longer in our own galaxy. The stellar cartography does not match any known Federation charts. Furthermore, the energy readings from that vessel suggest a civilization at least equal to our own in technological development, though following radically different design principles. I am detecting what appears to be a reactor signature consistent with matter-antimatter annihilation, but the containment methodology is unfamiliar." "They're hailing us, Captain," Uhura said, her fingers dancing across her communications panel. "Audio only. The language is unknown, but the universal translator is attempting to compensate. It seems to be processing successfully, though the syntax suggests a culture with rigid hierarchical structures." Kirk nodded. On speaker. The voice that emerged was smooth, cultured, with an accent that suggested careful education and absolute confidence. "Unknown vessel, you have entered Imperial space without authorization and without proper transponder identification. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. You have 30 seconds to acknowledge compliance." Kirk met Spock's gaze, then looked to his helmsman. "Sulu, status of the warp drive." "Intermittent, Captain. Whatever that phenomenon was, it scrambled our dilithium matrix. The crystals are misaligned at the quantum level. I'd estimate 6 hours minimum before we can attempt even Warp 1, and that's if we don't push the engines before then. 6 hours." Kirk's mind raced through the tactical situation, cataloging the variables, the unknowns, the dangers. They were alone in hostile space, their primary means of escape compromised, facing a vessel that outgunned them by an order of magnitude. But he had faced impossible odds before, and the key was always the same: gather information, find leverage, and never let them see you sweat. "Open a channel," Kirk said. "This is Captain James T. Kirk of the United Federation of Planets Starship Enterprise. We mean no harm and seek only peaceful contact. Our arrival in your space was unintentional, the result of a spatial anomaly beyond our control. We request permission to effect repairs and establish diplomatic relations." The silence that followed stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. Kirk could feel the tension on the bridge, the way his crew looked to him for reassurance that this situation was manageable, that their captain had a plan. He kept his expression neutral, confident, even as his mind prepared for the worst. Scotty's voice crackled over the intercom from engineering, demanding to know what had happened to his engines, and Kirk heard McCoy muttering something about damned spatial anomalies and shore leave that never happened. When the voice returned, it carried a different quality, as though the speaker had re-evaluated his initial assessment and found something unexpected. "Captain Kirk, I am Grand Admiral Thrawn, commander of the 7th Fleet of the Galactic Empire. Your vessel and its capabilities are most intriguing. I propose a meeting, face-to-face, aboard my flagship. You will bring no more than 2 companions. Any attempt at deception or aggression will result in the immediate destruction of your ship. Do you accept these terms?" Kirk glanced at Spock, saw the minute shake of his first officer's head, the logical warning that this could be a trap. But Kirk had learned long ago that sometimes the boldest move was the only move, that captains who hid behind their shields rarely won the day. And there was something in Thrawn's voice, a quality of genuine curiosity beneath the threat, that suggested this admiral was interested in more than simple conquest. "I accept," Kirk said. "Transmit your coordinates and we'll beam over." "Beam?" The voice sounded genuinely curious. "Ah, I see. A matter transportation system. Fascinating. Very well, Captain Kirk. I look forward to our conversation. I will have a receiving party prepared in Hangar Bay 7. I trust your transportation method is precise enough to avoid materializing inside solid bulkheads." "We've had practice," Kirk said dryly. The channel closed. Kirk rose from his chair, tugging his tunic straight, and gestured to Spock and McCoy. "Gentlemen, it seems we're going to meet the neighbors. Scotty, you have the con. If we're not back in 2 hours, get the Enterprise out of here by any means necessary." "Captain, you can't be serious," McCoy protested, his face reddening with frustration. "We don't know anything about these people, their customs, their technology. For all we know, they could be planning to dissect us the moment we materialize. Or worse, they could have some kind of plague that our immune systems aren't prepared for. Then you'll have plenty to complain about on the way over, Bones," Kirk said, allowing himself a tight smile. "And you'll be right there to treat us if we catch something. Mr. Spock, arm yourself with a phaser, but keep it holstered. Let's not give them an excuse." "A logical precaution, Captain," Spock said. "Though I would note that our defensive capabilities are minimal should they choose to detain us. We would be relying entirely on their adherence to the stated terms." "Then we'll have to make sure they don't want to break those terms," Kirk said. "Come on. Time to see what kind of empire we're dealing with." The transporter room was quiet, except for the hum of the pad energizers. Kirk stepped onto the platform, flanked by his officers, and nodded to the technician at the controls. The young ensign looked nervous, his hands hovering over the transport sequence, and Kirk gave him a reassuring nod. "We'll be fine, Ensign. Standard transport. If anything goes wrong, pull us back immediately." "Aye, sir," the ensign said, his voice steadier than his hands. Kirk took a taut breath, centered himself, and looked at his companions. Spock stood with perfect Vulcan composure, his hand resting near his phaser, his eyes already analyzing the unknown they were about to face. McCoy looked decidedly unhappy, his medical tricorder clutched like a talisman, his jaw set in the stubborn expression that meant he was going to complain the entire time but would never abandon his captain. "Energize," Kirk said. The familiar tingle of dematerialization washed over him, the transporter room dissolving into columns of light and energy. For a moment, Kirk existed in a state between matter and energy, his consciousness riding the annular confinement beam, and then he was somewhere else entirely. The hangar bay of the Star Destroyer was vast, a cathedral of grey durasteel and harsh lighting that could have held a dozen Enterprises. Rows of TIE fighters hung from ceiling racks like sleeping bats, their solar panels folded against their spherical cockpits, their twin-ion engines gleaming dully in the artificial light. Stormtroopers in white armor stood at attention in perfect lines, their blaster rifles held at identical angles, their helmets obscuring any hint of individuality. The precision was remarkable, almost inhuman, and Kirk noted the way they stood without fidgeting, without the small human movements that marked living beings. At the center of this martial display stood a figure in a white uniform, his hands clasped behind his back, his red eyes glowing with an intelligence that seemed to dissect Kirk even from a distance. Grand Admiral Thrawn stepped forward as the transporter effect faded, his gaze moving from Kirk to Spock to McCoy with the focused intensity of a predator evaluating prey. He was tall, lean, with blue skin, and features that suggested a species Kirk had never encountered. His uniform was immaculate, tailored perfectly to his frame, and he wore it with the casual authority of a man who had never known defeat and could not conceive of it. "Captain Kirk," Thrawn said, inclining his head in a gesture that might have been respect or might have been mockery. "Welcome aboard the Chimera. I must confess, your arrival has provided a most welcome diversion from the tedium of suppressing yet another insignificant rebel cell. Your ship's design is unlike anything in Imperial records, which suggests either a very remote origin or a very old one. Given the lack of hyperspace residue and the unusual energy signature of your entry, I suspect the former. You are from another galaxy entirely, are you not?" Kirk met those red eyes without flinching, reading the calculation behind them, the mind that was already 3 moves ahead in a game Kirk had only just learned existed. "That's one theory. Another is that we're from a parallel dimension, or a future so distant your records haven't caught up yet. Does it matter?" Thrawn's lips curved in a slight smile. "It matters insofar as it determines what use you might be to the Empire. But you are correct that the precise origin is less relevant than the practical implications. You command a vessel with technology we do not possess, in a state of temporary vulnerability, and you're attempting to establish whether I am a threat or an opportunity. Allow me to clarify. I am both." "Direct," Kirk said. "I appreciate that." "Efficiency is a virtue," Thrawn said, "as is honesty when it serves a strategic purpose. Come, Captain. Walk with me. Let us discuss your situation and perhaps find a solution that benefits us both." The Chimera's corridors were sterile, functional, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Thrawn led them through passageways where officers snapped to attention and crew members pressed themselves against walls to allow their admiral passage. Kirk noticed the fear in their eyes, the way they avoided Thrawn's gaze, and he filed that observation away. This was not a man who inspired loyalty through charisma, but through something else. Respect, perhaps, or terror. The distinction was important, and Kirk made mental notes about the power structure he was observing. They passed viewports that showed the curve of Lothal below, brown and scarred, and Kirk saw mining operations that had stripped entire regions down to bedrock. Imperial factories belched smoke into the atmosphere, and the debris field they had noticed on arrival resolved into the wreckage of civilian satellites and defense platforms. This was a conquered world, stripped for resources, and Kirk felt a cold anger settle into his chest. They entered a conference room dominated by a holographic display table. Thrawn gestured for Kirk to approach, and the table flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of the surrounding star systems. Lothal glowed at the center, surrounded by trade routes marked in blue and military installations marked in red. The density of red markers was staggering, a web of control that extended in every direction. You find yourself in what was once the territory of the Galactic Republic, Thrawn began, his fingers tracing patterns across the hologram. That government was corrupt, inefficient, plagued by bureaucracy and internal strife. It fell, as all such systems must, and from its ashes rose the Empire. Order, stability, the rule of law extending from the core to the outer rim. We have brought peace to a galaxy that had known nothing but chaos for millennia. I've heard similar justifications before, Kirk said quietly, usually from men who confuse oppression with order. Thrawn's expression did not change, but something flickered in those red eyes, a spark of appreciation or danger. You disapprove. How refreshingly direct. Tell me, Captain, in your Federation, how do you maintain peace among so many worlds? Your vessel suggests an advanced civilization, one capable of organizing resources on a massive scale. What methods do you employ to ensure compliance? Through mutual consent, Kirk said. Through the belief that freedom and cooperation are stronger than tyranny and fear. We don't force worlds to join us. They choose to, because they see the benefits of working together for common goals. Idealism, Thrawn said, his tone neutral but his gaze sharp. Admirable but impractical on a galactic scale. I suspect your Federation is smaller than the Empire, more homogeneous, less prone to the conflicts that arise when billions of beings compete for resources and power. Here, strength is the only currency that matters. The Force itself teaches us this. The Force? Spock interjected, his tone carefully neutral but his interest obvious. Thrawn smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. An energy field that binds the galaxy together. Some can manipulate it, bend it to their will, use it to see possible futures or influence the minds of the weak. The Jedi once used it to maintain their hold on the Republic, claiming moral authority while serving their own interests. They were warrior monks who appointed themselves guardians of peace and justice, but they were as political as any senator, as corruptible as any bureaucrat. The Emperor, in his wisdom, eliminated them. Now the Force serves the Empire, as all things must. Kirk absorbed this, connecting pieces, building a picture of this new galaxy. A mystical energy field that could be weaponized, used for control. A religious order destroyed by a tyrant who had risen to power through means Kirk could only guess at. And beneath it all, the fundamental question. How did you fight an empire that claimed cosmic authority? And what do you want from us, Grand Admiral? Kirk asked. Your cooperation, Thrawn said simply. Your ship represents a technological advancement that could prove invaluable to the Empire's interests. That matter transportation system alone would revolutionize our logistics capabilities. Imagine being able to deploy troops instantly to any location within transporter range, or to extract high-value assets from hostile environments without the need for shuttles or landing craft. The military applications are obvious, but there are civilian benefits as well. Emergency medical transport, resource distribution, disaster relief. You want us to help you build weapons, Kirk said flatly. I want you to help us maintain order, Thrawn corrected. But I am not unreasonable, Captain. I understand you need time to consider. For now, accept my hospitality. Your ship will not be molested, and you are free to return to it. But know this, refusal is not without consequences. There are others in the Empire less patient than I, less inclined to see the value in preserving unique specimens. Lord Vader, for instance, has little tolerance for those who defy imperial authority. I would hate for your vessel to be reduced to slag and debris because you could not see the logic of your situation. The threat hung in the air, polite and absolute. Kirk looked at Spock, saw the minute tension in his first officer's stance, the way his hand had moved fractionally closer to his phaser. McCoy was staring at Thrawn with barely concealed disgust, his medical mind already cataloguing the moral pathology on display. We'll need to discuss this with our crew, Kirk said carefully. Of course, Thrawn said. I am a reasonable man, Captain Kirk. 24 hours. After that, I will require your answer. He gestured to the doorway, where stormtroopers waited to escort them back to the hangar bay. Until then, I suggest you explore your options carefully. This galaxy can be most unforgiving to those who mistake principle for strategy. And Captain, one more thing. Kirk paused at the threshold. Yes? I have studied the art and culture of thousands of species, Thrawn said. I have learned that a civilization's greatest achievements and its deepest vulnerabilities are often one and the same. Your Federation values freedom and individual choice. Noble principles. But they also make you predictable. You will choose to resist, because to do otherwise would violate everything you believe. I respect that. I also know how to exploit it. Kirk held his gaze for a long moment. You're very confident, Admiral. I am very thorough, Thrawn said. There is a difference. The transporter beam pulled them back to the Enterprise, and Kirk stepped off the pad with his jaw set and his mind already working through the angles. The conversation with Thrawn had confirmed his worst fears and provided valuable intelligence. They were dealing with a brilliant tactician, a man who studied his opponents with the dedication of a scientist and the ruthlessness of a conqueror. Worse, he had the resources of an entire galactic empire at his disposal. Scotty was waiting in the corridor outside, his expression grim, his uniform stained with the kind of grease that came from emergency repairs in cramped Jeffries tubes. Captain, we've been monitoring their communications. Or trying to. Their encryption is unlike anything I've seen, but the amount of traffic suggests they're preparing for something big. And there's another ship approaching, smaller, keeping to the edges of the debris field. It's using some kind of stealth technology, minimal energy signature, but our sensors caught the gravitational distortion. Kirk's instincts prickled. Can you identify it? Not with certainty, sir, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's trying very hard not to be noticed. Could be smugglers, could be reconnaissance, could be this rebellion Thrawn mentioned. Kirk turned to Spock. Options? Limited, Spock said, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture he adopted when delivering particularly unpleasant assessments. The Grand Admiral's threat was not idle. We are outgunned by a factor of approximately 15-1 based on the weapons emplacements we observed. We cannot retreat due to warp drive damage. Conventional combat would result in our destruction within minutes. However, his interest in our technology suggests he values us more intact than destroyed. That provides leverage, however minimal. And leverage is all we need, Kirk said. Bones, what's your read on him? McCoy frowned, his brow furrowing in the way that meant he was wrestling with something that offended both his medical ethics and his personal morality. Brilliant, ruthless, and convinced of his own superiority. He's not a fanatic, Jim. He's something worse. He's a true believer who thinks his tyranny is logical, that he's doing the galaxy a favor by crushing anyone who disagrees with him. He'll justify any atrocity as necessary for order, and he'll do it without losing a minute of sleep. Kirk nodded slowly. Then we play along, learn what we can, and find a way to turn this situation to our advantage. Thrawn thinks he's 3 steps ahead, but he doesn't know the Federation. He doesn't know us. He looked at Scotty. That ship in the debris field, can you hail it without the Imperials noticing? Aye, if we're careful. Tight beam transmission, low power, riding the interference from Lothal's ionosphere. But Captain, we don't know who they are. Could be just as dangerous as Thrawn. Then let's find out, Kirk said. And let's hope they're not friends of our new Admiral. The message went out in encrypted bursts, using a simple mathematical progression that any spacefaring species should recognize as artificial, an invitation to communicate. For long minutes there was no response, and Kirk stood on the bridge, watching the view screen where the Star Destroyer hung like a promise of annihilation. He could feel the weight of command settling on his shoulders, the responsibility for 430 souls who trusted him to bring them home safely. Then Uhura straightened, her hand going to her earpiece, her expression shifting from concentration to cautious hope. "Captain, we're receiving a response, audio only. They're asking who we are and what we want. The signal is heavily encrypted, but their technology is less advanced than ours. I'm reading emotional stress in the voice patterns, fatigue, suspicion. Tell them we're strangers in a hostile system looking for allies," Kirk said, "and that we're willing to help if they're willing to talk." Uhura's fingers flew across her console, encoding the message, sending it in a burst transmission that would be nearly impossible to intercept. The response came faster this time, as though the initial contact had broken through some barrier of distrust. The voice that came through was female, tinged with suspicion and fatigue, but also with the kind of determination that Kirk recognized from every resistance fighter he had ever met. "This is Hera Syndulla, captain of the Ghost. If you're not with the Empire, then you're either very brave or very stupid, probably both. What's your situation?" Kirk allowed himself a small smile. "Both, most likely. We're in need of repairs and information. The Empire wants our technology. We'd prefer not to give it to them." A pause, and Kirk could almost hear the calculations happening on the other end, the weighing of risk versus potential gain. "Meet us planetside. Coordinates incoming. Come alone, Captain Kirk, and come unarmed. If this is a trap, you won't live to regret it." The coordinates appeared on Sulu's console, a location in Lothal's wilderness far from Imperial patrols, in a region where sensor interference from ancient ruins and magnetic anomalies would make detection difficult. Kirk looked at Spock, saw the raised eyebrow, the unspoken warning that this could be walking into an ambush. "I'll take a security team," Kirk said, "but keep the phasers on stun. Something tells me we're going to need friends more than firepower." "Captain, I must protest," Spock said, his voice carrying the formal edge that meant he was genuinely concerned. "We have insufficient data about these individuals. Their technological capabilities, their cultural values, their relationship with the Empire. Any of these factors could result in our capture or death." "Noted, Mr. Spock," Kirk said, "but we're not going to learn anything sitting up here. And if there's a resistance movement, they're our best chance of finding allies who can help us navigate this situation." McCoy stepped forward, his medical bag slung over his shoulder. "I'm coming too. If we're walking into a potential ambush, you'll need a doctor. Bones, I need you here in case something happens to me." "The hell with that," McCoy said flatly. "You're going to need me down there, Jim. I can feel it in my bones. No pun intended." Kirk looked at his friend, saw the stubborn set of his jaw, and knew there was no point arguing. "Fine. Spock, you have the con. If we're not back in 4 hours, implement Emergency Protocol 7. Get the Enterprise clear and make for the nearest Federation outpost, even if you have to crawl there on impulse power." "Understood, Captain," Spock said. "I will note for the record that I find this course of action highly illogical and potentially catastrophic." "So noted," Kirk said. "Mr. Sulu, prepare to beam us down on my mark." Lothal's surface was dry and windswept, a planet of grasslands and rocky mesas where the Empire had built factories and strip-mined the Earth for minerals to feed the vast machine of galactic conquest. The coordinates led to an abandoned comm tower, its durasteel frame rusting under twin suns that burned with harsh white light. Kirk materialized with his security team, phasers holstered but accessible, and immediately scanned the area for threats. The Ghost was there, a modified VCX-100 light freighter with mismatched hull plating and the scars of a dozen battles. Blaster scoring marked her hull, and one of her shield generators had been replaced with a different model, suggesting field repairs done with whatever was available. The ship had character, the kind that came from hard use and harder survival. The boarding ramp was down, and standing at the base was a woman with green skin and a Leku headtail, her hand resting on a blaster holster, her eyes sharp with the wariness of someone who had survived by trusting no one. She wore a flight suit that had seen better days, patched and repaired in a dozen places, and her stance was that of a pilot, weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. Kirk approached with his hands visible, flanked by McCoy and two security officers who kept their phasers holstered but remained alert. Hera watched them come, her gaze moving from their unfamiliar uniforms to the devices at their hips, and Kirk could see her mind working through the same calculations he had made aboard the Chimera. "You're not from around here," Hera said. "Not quite a question." "Different galaxy," Kirk said. "Accident of physics. We just want to go home." "And Thrawn wants your ship," Hera said. "That makes you dangerous to us and valuable to him. Why should I believe you're not working for the Empire? Why shouldn't I assume this is some elaborate trap to draw out rebel cells?" Kirk met her eyes, reading the pain there, the losses she had endured, the weight of command that he knew all too well. "Because we believe in freedom. And from what I've seen, that puts us on opposite sides from your Grand Admiral." Something shifted in Hera's expression, a slight softening, though her hand never moved from her blaster. "The Empire destroys freedom. They came to Lothal, promising prosperity and security, and they've turned it into a prison. They strip mine the planet, enslave the population, and crush anyone who speaks out. My crew and I fight back, along with others scattered across the galaxy. We call ourselves the Rebellion, though right now we're more scattered cells than an army. And if Thrawn gets his hands on your technology, we'll lose what little chance we have." Kirk felt the weight of that statement, the responsibility it implied. He had sworn to uphold the Prime Directive, to avoid interfering in the natural development of other civilizations. But the Federation's charter also spoke of liberty, of the right of all sentient beings to determine their own destiny. And here, on this dusty planet under alien suns, he was faced with a choice that had no easy answer. "What do you need from us?" Kirk asked. Hera studied him for a long moment, her leku shifting slightly in what might have been a gesture of consideration or stress. "Come inside. Let's talk about what's possible. But know this, Captain Kirk. If you betray us, if you lead the Empire to us, there's nowhere in this galaxy you can hide. We might not have your technology, but we know how to fight dirty, and we never forget." "Understood," Kirk said. "And for what it's worth, we don't betray our allies." "We'll see," Hera said. "We'll see." The interior of the Ghost was cramped but functional, a ship designed for smuggling and quick escapes rather than comfort. Every surface showed signs of modification, jury-rigged systems patched together with ingenuity and desperation. Hera led them to a common area where a Lasat warrior named Zeb and a young Mandalorian woman named Sabine waited, both armed and suspicious. A droid, C-110P, beeped irritably from the corner, and Kirk noted the way it kept a photoreceptor trained on the visitors, analyzing, recording. Sabine's armor was decorated with colorful graffiti-style art, a rebellion against conformity that Kirk found oddly reassuring. Zeb was massive, muscled, with a bow rifle that could probably punch through durasteel. Both looked like they had seen combat recently, their movements careful, their eyes tracking every gesture Kirk and his team made. "Thrawn has been tightening his grip on Lothal for months," Hera explained, pulling up holographic displays of Imperial troop movements and factory locations from a portable projector. "He's systematic, patient, and he doesn't make mistakes. Every time we hit a target, he anticipates it and sets a trap. Every time we try to rally the people, he strikes first and makes examples. Public executions, mass arrests, families torn apart. He's not like other Imperials. He doesn't rely on brute force alone. He understands art, culture, psychology. He uses them as weapons." Spock would have loved this conversation, Kirk thought. A most formidable opponent. His tactical approach suggests a mind capable of synthesizing disparate data points into predictive models. "Terrifying is the word I'd use," Sabine said, her arms crossed. "And now he's got you and your magic ship. Unless you plan to fight, you're just another tool for the Empire to use against us." Kirk met her challenge head-on. We don't plan to be anyone's tool, but we're not equipped for a prolonged conflict. Our weapons are designed to disable, not destroy. Our ship is a vessel of exploration, not war. We have 430 crew members whose safety is my first responsibility." "Then what good are you?" Zeb growled, his voice like gravel in a tumbler. "We're good at improvising," Kirk said, a slight smile touching his lips. "And we've faced down empires before. Not always successfully, but we're still here. We've learned a few things about how to survive when the odds are impossible." Hera's expression sharpened. "You've fought empires? And won?" "Not always," Kirk admitted. "We've lost battles, lost people, made mistakes that cost lives. But we're still standing, still fighting, still believing that freedom is worth the cost. That counts for something." The droid beeped rapidly, a staccato burst of alarm, and Hera glanced at a readout on her wrist. Her face tightened. "Imperial patrol, 2 kilometers out and closing. Probably routine, but we can't take chances. We need to move." But Kirk was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the germ of a plan forming in the tactical part of his mind that never fully shut off. "No, let them come. I have an idea." "Captain," McCoy said warily, "that tone of voice usually means you're about to do something that gives me gray hair. Trust me, Bones," Kirk said, then looked at Hera. "How good are you at following unexpected leads?" "Depends on where they go," Hera said. "Then let's hope they go somewhere useful," Kirk said. "Here's what we're going to do." The Imperial patrol consisted of 2 ATDP walkers and a troop transport speeder, their sensors sweeping the area around the comm tower with methodical precision. The officer in charge was young, ambitious, eager to prove himself to the Grand Admiral by capturing rebel scum and earning a commendation. He had studied at the Imperial Academy on Coruscant, graduated in the top 10% of his class, and believed absolutely in the Empire's manifest destiny to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. He did not expect to find a Starfleet captain standing in the open, hands raised in apparent surrender, his strange companions flanking him with expressions of resignation. The rebels behind them looked surly but subdued, their weapons holstered, and the officer's sensors showed no sign of an ambush. It was almost too perfect, which made him suspicious, but his ambition overrode his caution. "Identify yourself," the officer demanded, his blaster rifle trained on Kirk's center mass. "Captain James T. Kirk, United Federation of Planets," Kirk said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. "I'm here under the authority of Grand Admiral Thrawn to inspect potential rebel activity. These individuals were attempting to sabotage Imperial equipment. I've placed them under citizen's arrest, pending transfer to your custody." The officer hesitated, his training warring with his ambition. This strange man wore no Imperial uniform, spoke with an accent that suggested origins far from the core worlds, but he spoke with the confidence of someone who expected to be obeyed. He had invoked the Grand Admiral's name, which was not something anyone did lightly. The rebels behind him looked surly but subdued, their weapons holstered, and the officer's sensors showed no sign of an ambush. "I'll need to verify this with command," the officer said, his rifle still aimed, but his tone less certain. "Of course," Kirk said, his expression perfectly reasonable, "but I'd do it quickly. The Grand Admiral is not known for his patience with bureaucratic delays, and these rebels have intelligence about insurgent cells throughout the sector. Time is of the essence." That decided it. The mention of intelligence, the promise of information that could lead to more arrests, more commendations, perhaps even a promotion. The officer lowered his rifle slightly, gesturing for his troops to secure the prisoners, stand down and prepare for transport. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. And in that moment of distraction, when the stormtroopers were focused on the rebels and their commanding officer was already composing his report in his head, Kirk moved. The phaser blast was set to heavy stun, a bright blue beam that struck the officer square in the chest and dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. The energy discharge was nearly silent compared to blaster fire, just a high-pitched whine and a flash of light, and the officer never knew what hit him. Spock and the security officers fired simultaneously, their shots precise and practiced, their training taking over, and in 3 seconds, every stormtrooper was unconscious on the ground. The ATDP walkers began to turn, their chin-mounted blasters swiveling toward the threat, servo motors whining as the pilots inside tried to acquire targets. But Sabine was already moving, her hands working quickly to plant charges on the nearest walker's knee joint, shaped explosive devices that she had crafted herself from scavenged Imperial ordnance. She rolled clear, hit the detonator, and the explosion was sharp and focused, severing hydraulic lines and support struts. The walker toppled with a groan of tortured metal, its legs buckling, and crashed into the comm tower with enough force to shake the ground. Zeb leaped onto the second walker with a roar, his bow rifle crackling with energy as he smashed through the viewport and dragged the pilot out. The man screamed once before Zeb's fist silenced him, and the Lasat leaped clear as the walker, now pilotless, stumbled and fell. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, and when it was over, the only sound was the wind across the grasslands and the faint crackle of damaged electronics. Kirk holstered his phaser, his breathing steady, his mind already moving to the next problem. Hera stared at Kirk, her expression somewhere between shock and admiration. "That was insane, completely insane. You just attacked an Imperial patrol." "That was necessary," Kirk said, his tone brooking no argument. "Thrawn will know we did this within the hour. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" Sabine demanded, her voice rising. "You just declared war on the Empire. Thrawn won't negotiate now. He'll hunt you down and tear your ship apart piece by piece." "No," Kirk said, his eyes hard with the kind of determination that had carried him through impossible situations before. "I just made it clear we're not going to be his prisoners or his tools. Now we need to make sure he understands that destroying us won't get him what he wants." "Captain," McCoy said quietly, his medical tricorder out and scanning the unconscious stormtroopers, "we've just crossed a line. The Prime Directive, non-interference, all of it. We're in this now, for better or worse." "I know, Bones," Kirk said, "but some lines need to be crossed. Some fights need to be fought." Zeb grunted, shouldering his bow rifle. "So what's your plan, Captain Kirk? Because right now, we've got maybe 20 minutes before reinforcements arrive, and I'd like to not be here when they do." Kirk looked at Hera, seeing the question in her eyes, the hope warring. With caution, "How fast can you get a message to your rebel contacts?" "Fast enough," Hera said slowly. "What do you need?" "I need Thrawn to know that if he wants our technology, he's going to have to let us repair our ship and leave in peace. And I need your rebellion to be ready to act when he makes his move. Because he will make a move. Men like Thrawn always do." "He'll never agree," Hera said. "He'll just wait us out, wear us down, use his superior resources to crush us." "Then we don't give him time," Kirk said. "We force his hand. We create a situation where his logical, methodical approach becomes a liability instead of an advantage." Spock tilted his head, a gesture Kirk knew meant his first officer was running calculations. "Captain, you are proposing a hostage negotiation where we are simultaneously the hostages and the leverage. The logical complexity is considerable." "Welcome to command, Mr. Spock," Kirk said. "Sometimes the only way to win an impossible situation is to change the rules of the game." Sabine looked at Kirk with new respect. "You're crazier than I thought. I like it." "The question is," Kirk said, "can you get your people mobilized fast enough?" Hera nodded slowly, her hand going to her comlink. "We've been waiting for an opportunity like this for months, a distraction big enough to hit multiple targets simultaneously. If you can keep Thrawn's attention focused on you, we can hit supply depots, communications arrays, recruitment centers. We can hurt them, Captain Kirk, make them bleed, then do it," Kirk said, "and coordinate your timing with me. When Thrawn calls me back to negotiate, that's when you strike." The plan was audacious and reckless and depended on a dozen variables falling perfectly into place, which was to say it was exactly the kind of plan Kirk excelled at. Within 6 hours, The message had spread through the rebel network like fire through dry grass, cell leaders coordinating their efforts, scavenging weapons and explosives, preparing for a coordinated strike that could change the balance of power on Lothal. Within 12 hours, Thrawn had called Kirk back to the Chimera for a conversation that both men knew would determine the fate of everyone involved. Kirk stood once more in the conference room, but this time he was not alone. Hera had insisted on accompanying him, her presence a statement that the rebels were not afraid, that they would stand beside this strange captain from the stars. Thrawn studied them both with those red eyes, his expression unreadable, his hands folded on the table in a gesture of perfect composure. "You attacked an Imperial patrol," Thrawn said, his voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of something dangerous. "Killed 12 soldiers, destroyed valuable equipment, and openly allied yourself with terrorists. I am disappointed, Captain Kirk. I had hoped you were more intelligent than this. I had hoped you could see the larger picture." "I'm intelligent enough to know when I'm being backed into a corner," Kirk said, his stance relaxed, but his eyes alert. "You gave me an ultimatum. I'm giving you one in return. Let us repair our ship and leave, and we'll take our technology with us. You'll never see us again. Try to stop us, and we'll destroy the Enterprise rather than let you have it." "A bluff," Thrawn said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice, the first crack in his perfect confidence. "A certainty," Kirk replied. "The Federation has a protocol for this situation. Article 14, Section 30, one of Starfleet General Orders. If our ship is in danger of capture by a hostile force, we scuttle it. Complete destruction of all systems, all technology, all data. You'll get nothing but debris and radiation." Thrawn was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between Kirk and Hera, and Kirk could almost see the gears turning, the calculations being run, the probabilities being assessed. "And in exchange for your freedom, what do you offer?" "Nothing," Kirk said. "But if you allow us to leave peacefully, I give you my word we won't return, we won't share intelligence about your empire with hostile forces, and we won't interfere in your internal affairs. We'll disappear into whatever void brought us here, and you'll never have to worry about us again." "Your word," Thrawn said softly, his fingers drumming once on the table. "The word of a man who has already proven he will break his promises when convenient. The word of a man who attacked my soldiers and allied himself with insurgents." "I never promised you anything," Kirk said, his voice hardening. "You demanded my cooperation. There's a difference. A demand is not a negotiation, it's a threat. And I don't respond well to threats." Thrawn's lips quirked in what might have been a smile, or might have been something else entirely. "You are a tactician, Captain Kirk. Not a great one, not yet, but you have potential. You see patterns, exploit weaknesses, understand the value of misdirection. Very well, I will allow you to repair your vessel and depart. But know this. If you or any vessel bearing your technology ever returns to this galaxy, I will hunt you to the edge of the universe and beyond. There will be no negotiation, no quarter, no mercy. Do you accept these terms?" Kirk met those red eyes and saw the truth there. Thrawn meant every word. This was not a man who made idle threats or forgave insults to his authority. But it was also a way out, a path that led home, and Kirk knew better than to refuse victory when it was offered, even if it came wrapped in warnings. "I accept," Kirk said. Thrawn nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Then we have an accord. Your ship will be permitted to complete repairs unmolested, but you will do so within 72 hours. And you will remain within sensor range at all times. Any deviation will be considered a breach of our agreement, and I will respond with overwhelming force." "Understood," Kirk said. He turned to leave, but Thrawn's voice stopped him, that cultured tone carrying across the space like a blade wrapped in silk. "Captain Kirk, one final question, if you'll indulge me. Your Federation, this government you serve so loyally, this organization that values freedom and individual choice above order and stability, do you truly believe it is superior to the Empire?" Kirk looked back, his expression thoughtful, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. I believe it gives people the freedom to be their best selves, rather than forcing them into compliance. I believe it allows for growth, change, the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today. And yes, I believe that's worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Then you are an idealist, Thrawn said, and there was something almost like sadness in his voice. Idealists rarely survive in this galaxy, Captain. They burn bright and die young, consumed by the very principles they hold dear. I suspect you will find that lesson more painful than you anticipate. Maybe, Kirk said. Or maybe you'll find that ideals are harder to kill than you think. The transporter beam took them back to the Enterprise, and Kirk stood on the pad for a moment, letting the familiar hum of his ship settle into his bones. They had survived the encounter with Thrawn, negotiated a way out, but Kirk knew the cost would come later. He had violated the Prime Directive, interfered in the development of another civilization, taken sides in a conflict that was not his own. Starfleet Command would have questions, and Kirk was not sure he had answers that would satisfy them, but that was a problem for later. Right now, he had a ship to repair and a crew to get home. The Enterprise worked around the clock, her crew pushing themselves past exhaustion, past the limits of what should have been possible. Scotty cursed and cajoled the dilithium matrix back into alignment, his hands raw from working in the cramped spaces of the engineering section, his voice hoarse from shouting instructions to his team. Spock recalibrated the navigational deflector to account for the different quantum constants of this universe, his Vulcan endurance allowing him to work for 36 hours straight without rest. Kirk stood on the bridge, watching the countdown tick toward their departure window, and tried not to think about what they were leaving behind. Hera and her crew had launched their coordinated strikes exactly on schedule, hitting 6 Imperial targets simultaneously, and the chaos had given the Enterprise the cover it needed to complete repairs without interference. But it had also cost lives, both Rebel and Imperial, and Kirk felt the weight of those deaths even though he had never met the people involved. Hera came aboard on the final day, escorted by security but welcomed as an ally. She walked the corridors with wide eyes, touching the clean walls and functioning consoles with something like reverence, and Kirk gave her a tour that he knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He showed her the bridge, the engineering section, the medical bay where McCoy demonstrated a medical tricorder that could diagnose diseases in seconds. He showed her what the future could look like, what a galaxy could become when it chose cooperation over conquest. "This is what you're going back to," Hera said quietly, standing in the observation lounge and looking out at the stars. "A place where ships are built for exploration, not conquest. Where technology serves people instead of oppressing them. It's not perfect," Kirk said, standing beside her. "We have our conflicts, our failures, our moments of darkness. But we try. Every day, we try to be better than we were yesterday." "We're trying too," Hera said, her voice thick with emotion. "But it's hard to hope when the Empire controls everything, when every victory is just a delay before the next defeat. Sometimes I wonder if we're just prolonging the inevitable." Kirk took her hand, squeezed it once, a gesture of solidarity and understanding. "Don't stop trying. Don't ever stop. The moment you do, they've won. The moment you accept that oppression is inevitable, that freedom is impossible, that's when the darkness truly takes over." She smiled, sad and fierce and beautiful in her determination. "Good luck, Captain Kirk. I hope your Federation appreciates what it has. I hope they understand how lucky they are to have captains like you. I hope your rebellion finds what it's looking for," Kirk said. "I hope you live to see the day when Lothal is free, when the Empire is just a bad memory, when children can grow up without knowing fear." "Maybe," Hera said. "Maybe someday." The transporter beam took Hera back to the Ghost, and Kirk watched her ship accelerate away into the stars, carrying with it the fragile hope of people who had nothing left but their defiance. Then he turned to Sulu, his voice firm with command, carrying the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. "Mr. Sulu, Get us out of here. The Enterprise pivoted on her axis, her impulse engines flaring blue-white against the black, the light from her nacelles painting the debris field in shades of azure and silver. Ahead, space shimmered with the promise of another rift, this one carefully calculated by Spock to match the quantum signature of their home universe, a doorway back to the galaxy they knew. Behind, the Chimera held position, its weapons powered but silent, a predator watching its prey escape but secure in the knowledge that it had extracted value from the encounter. On the Chimera's bridge, Thrawn stood before the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, his red eyes tracking the Enterprise's departure with the focus of someone committing every detail to memory. A lieutenant approached, nervous in the presence of the Grand Admiral, his datapad clutched like a shield. "Sir," the lieutenant said carefully, "should we pursue? We could deploy TIE fighters, use tractor beams to prevent their escape." "No," Thrawn said softly, his voice carrying the finality of absolute authority. "Let them go. They have given me something far more valuable than technology." "Sir?" The lieutenant's confusion was evident, his training insufficient to understand the tactical nuances his commander operated within. "They have given me a glimpse of what we are fighting against," Thrawn said, his gaze never leaving the viewport. "Not just the rebellion, but the idea behind it. The belief that freedom is worth any cost, that order must be chosen rather than imposed. It is a dangerous idea, Lieutenant, perhaps the most dangerous idea in the galaxy, one that must be eradicated completely if the Empire is to endure. And can it be, sir? Can an idea truly be destroyed?" Thrawn turned from the viewport, his expression distant, his thoughts already moving to the next campaign, the next strategy, the long game that he played better than anyone in the Empire. "All things can be eradicated, Lieutenant. It is simply a matter of will and time, and I have both in abundance." The Enterprise reached the rift and plunged through, her hull singing with energies that defied standard physics, her crew holding tight as reality inverted around them. Kirk stood in the center of the bridge, his hands gripping the rail, watching the viewscreen dissolve into colors that should not exist, patterns that hurt to perceive. And for one impossible moment, he felt something he could not name, a presence that seemed to flow through the ship and through him, ancient and vast and utterly aware. The Force, he thought, though he could not have said why or how he knew. The Force knows we were here, and it will remember. The sensation was overwhelming, like standing in the presence of something divine, something that existed beyond the boundaries of normal space and time. Kirk felt his consciousness expand, touching the edges of something infinite, and in that moment he understood why the Jedi had been so powerful, why Thrawn had spoken of the Force with such reverence and fear. It was not just an energy field, it was the fabric of reality itself in this galaxy, aware and watching and judging. Then the rift sealed, the sensation vanished, and they were through. The familiar stars of Federation space welcomed them home like old friends, their positions exactly where they should be according to the star charts. The constellations recognizable and comforting. Cheers erupted on the bridge, crew members embracing each other with the relief of people who had survived something that should have killed them. Scotty's voice came over the comm with a triumphant shout about his engines pulling through, about how he had never doubted them for a moment, even though they all knew he had been terrified the entire time. Kirk allowed himself a smile, but it faded quickly as he looked at the view screen and thought of the galaxy they had left behind, the people still fighting their impossible war against an empire that would crush them without mercy. Hera and her crew, risking everything for a chance at freedom. The countless others scattered across that distant galaxy, holding on to hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. "Mr. Spock," Kirk said quietly, his voice carrying only to his first officer, "make a record of everything we saw, everything we learned. Seal it in the classified archives with a priority flag for Starfleet Command. Full analysis, tactical assessments, cultural observations, everything." "May I inquire as to your reasoning, Captain?" Spock asked, his eyebrow raised in that familiar gesture of curiosity. Kirk's jaw tightened, his eyes still on the viewscreen. "Because someday that rift might open again. And if it does, I want whoever goes through to know what they're facing. I want them to understand the Empire's capabilities, Thrawn's methods, the Force, and what it means. I want them to be ready in a way we weren't." "A logical precaution," Spock said, "though I would note that the probability of such an event occurring twice is astronomically low. The quantum fluctuations required to create a stable interdimensional passage are extraordinarily rare." "I've learned not to bet against astronomical odds, Mr. Spock," Kirk said. "Not when the stakes are this high, not when there are people's lives and freedom at stake." The Enterprise set course for Starbase 7, where engineers would repair the damage properly and admirals would demand explanations that Kirk was not entirely sure he could provide. There would be investigations, inquiries into his decisions, questions about why he had chosen to interfere in another civilization's internal conflicts. The Prime Directive violation would haunt his record, possibly end his career if the admirals decided to make an example of him. But for now, in the quiet moment between one crisis and the next, Kirk allowed himself to sit in his chair and close his eyes and remember. He remembered a pair of red eyes that had seen through every bluff, every strategy, every desperate ploy. He remembered a Twi'lek pilot who fought for freedom with the same determination Kirk brought to every mission. He remembered stormtroopers whose faces he had never seen, whose names he would never know, who had died because he had made a choice. Thrawn would not forget them. Kirk was certain of that. The Grand Admiral would file away every detail of their encounter, analyze their tactics, study their technology from the sensor readings his ships had gathered. And if they ever met again, Thrawn would be prepared in ways that Kirk could only imagine. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, Kirk found it almost comforting, because it meant that somewhere in the vast expanse of the multiverse, there were still worthy opponents, still challenges that required everything a captain could give. And it meant that the fight for freedom was not limited to one galaxy, one dimension, one corner of reality. It was universal, eternal, worth fighting for wherever it appeared. On Lothal, the rebellion struck 3 Imperial depots in coordinated raids, using the distraction of the Enterprise's departure to hit targets that had been impossible to reach for months. Hera flew the Ghost through blaster fire and TIE fighter swarms, her hands steady on the controls, her mind holding tight to the words of the strange captain who had come from the stars. "Don't stop trying. The moment you do, they've won." The raids were successful beyond their wildest hopes. Supply caches destroyed, communication arrays disabled, recruitment centers reduced to rubble. For the first time in months, the rebellion had dealt the Empire a significant blow, one that would be felt across the sector. The people of Lothal saw the explosions, heard the rumors, and for the first time in years, they allowed themselves to hope. But Thrawn was not a man who forgave insults or forgot defeats, no matter how minor. He studied the reports from the raids with the same focused intensity he brought to every problem, analyzing the tactics, the timing, the coordination. And he saw Kirk's hand in every detail, the influence of a mind trained in different methods, different philosophies. "Interesting," Thrawn murmured, standing alone in his private quarters surrounded by artwork from 1,000 worlds. "Most interesting indeed." He made notes, filed reports, began constructing a profile of Captain James T. Kirk that would one day be used to predict behavior, exploit weaknesses, ensure victory in any future encounter. Because Thrawn knew, with the certainty of someone who understood the currents of fate, that they would meet again. The Force had brought them together once, and the Force had a way of ensuring that significant threads remained connected. And in the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, the Emperor sat in his meditation chamber and felt a disturbance in the Force, a ripple that suggested something impossible had occurred. He reached out with his mind, probing the currents of destiny, and found a thread that led nowhere, a void where information should be. It intrigued him, it concerned him, but mostly it amused him. Emperor Palpatine had spent decades studying the Force, bending it to his will, using it to orchestrate the fall of the Jedi and the rise of his empire. He had seen possible futures, walked through the corridors of what might be, and shaped destiny itself to serve his purposes. But this was something new, something that his visions had not predicted, and that made it dangerous. "There are more things in heaven and earth, my old friend," the Emperor whispered to the memory of the Jedi he had destroyed, to the ghost of Yoda who had warned him that the dark side clouded everything than are dreamt of in your philosophy. The Force swirled around him, dark and hungry and patient, and in its depths he saw glimpses of the Forced One, impossible. A ship that defied all known design principles, traveling between dimensions as easily as his star destroyers traveled through hyperspace. A captain who believed in freedom with the fervor of a religious fanatic who would sacrifice everything to defend it. And a future where two galaxies might collide with consequences beyond even his ability to foresee. He would watch. He would wait. And when the time came, he would ensure that the lesson was learned across all of reality. There was no corner of existence, no universe hidden or distant, where the Empire's reach could not extend. The dark side of the Force was eternal, and through it, so was he. But even as the Emperor plotted, even as Thrawn analyzed, even as the machinery of the Empire ground forward in its inexorable conquest, something else was happening. In the hearts of people across Lothal and beyond, in the minds of those who had seen the Ghost fly free and the Imperial depots burn, hope was taking root. The kind of hope that was harder to kill than any rebel cell, more persistent than any insurgency. The hope that said freedom was possible, that tyranny could be resisted, that even the mightiest empire could be challenged by those brave enough to stand. The Force, which bound all things and saw all things, took note of the captain who had passed through its realm and left such a mark upon those he encountered. It filed the memory away in whatever vast consciousness governed the galaxy, a seed planted in fertile soil, waiting for the day when it might bloom into something greater. That day would come. All things, in the Force's infinite patience, eventually came to pass. Destiny was not fixed, but certain patterns repeated, certain themes echoed across time and space. And the eternal struggle between light and dark, freedom and tyranny, hope and despair, was the oldest pattern of all. The Enterprise sailed on through the infinite black, carrying with it the hope that some battles were worth fighting, that some principles were worth defending, and that somewhere in the vast expanse of creation there were still captains who believed that the universe could be better, kinder, freer than the one they had found. Kirk stood alone in his quarters that night, the lights dimmed, looking out at the stars through the viewport. He thought of Hera and her crew, fighting their impossible war. He thought of Thrawn and the cold logic that justified any atrocity in service of order. He thought of the Emperor, whoever and whatever he was, ruling a galaxy through fear and the manipulation of powers Kirk barely understood. And he thought of the Force, that strange energy that had touched him in the moment of passage, ancient and knowing and utterly beyond his comprehension. "I hope you find peace," Kirk said softly, knowing no one could hear him, knowing it did not matter. All of you, Hera, Sabine, Zeb, all the rebels fighting for freedom, the people of Lothal living under occupation, even the stormtroopers who are just following orders, who might not have chosen the Empire if they had been given a real choice. Whatever path you walk, whatever destiny you choose, I hope you find peace. The stars gave no answer, they never did, but Kirk had learned long ago that sometimes the act of hoping was enough, that the choice to believe in something better was itself a form of rebellion, a declaration that the universe was not fixed, not finished, not beyond redemption. And as the Enterprise warped toward home, carrying her crew and her secrets and her unshakable faith in the future, the galaxy far, far away continued its eternal struggle. Rebels fought and died. Imperial forces crushed dissent with brutal efficiency. Thrawn planned his campaigns with artistic precision. The Emperor shaped destiny from his throne on Coruscant. And the Force, which had existed before any of them and would exist long after they were dust, watched and waited and remembered. The Force remembered a captain who had refused to bow, who had chosen freedom over safety, who had inspired hope in the hopeless. It remembered the ripples he had left behind, the changes he had set in motion, the possibilities he had opened, and in the vast, timeless consciousness that governed the balance between light and dark, the Force approved. Because the Force understood something that the Empire never would, that hope could not be crushed, freedom could not be chained, and the human spirit, in all its forms across all galaxies, would always find a way to resist. It might take years, it might take generations, the cost might be terrible, the sacrifices unbearable, but in the end, light always found a way to shine through the darkness. That was the lesson the Force had learned over eons of watching civilizations rise and fall. That was the truth that Thrawn, for all his brilliance, could not fully comprehend. That was the weakness in the Emperor's grand design. And that was why Captain James T. Kirk's brief passage through the galaxy far, far away mattered more than any of them yet understood. The threads connecting these two universes, these two philosophies, these two visions of what the future could be, would never fully sever. They would remain, gossamer and faint, waiting for the moment when destiny called them back into alignment. When that moment came, when the barriers between galaxies grew thin once more, the choices made today would echo across tomorrow. The Enterprise would return, or another Federation vessel would find its way through, or the Empire would breach the dimensional walls seeking new worlds to conquer. When that day came, the galaxy far, far away would learn what Thrawn had already begun to understand, that there were forces in the universe stronger than any empire, deeper than any dark side, and more enduring than any evil. Forces like courage, like compassion, like the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Forces like hope. And hope, the Force knew with absolute certainty, was the most powerful weapon of all. It could not be seized in a tractor beam, could not be destroyed with a Death Star, could not be crushed beneath the heel of a stormtrooper's boot. It lived in hearts and minds, passed from person to person like a flame in the darkness, growing stronger with each new believer. Kirk had left that flame burning on Lothal. Hera would carry it forward, spreading it to others, nurturing it through the long years of struggle ahead, and one day that small flame would become a fire that would consume the Empire and birth something new. But that was a story for another time. For now, the story ended where all great stories must, not with certainty, but with possibility, not with answers, but with questions, not with an ending, but with the promise that somewhere, somewhen, the fight would continue, the light would endure, and captains like James T. Kirk would stand on the bridges of their vessels and declare to the universe that freedom was not negotiable, that hope was not naive, and that even in the darkest night, the stars still shone. The Force approved. And in approving, it ensured that the threads connecting these two galaxies would remain, waiting for the day when they would be drawn together once more. Waiting for the moment when the impossible would become real, and two visions of the future would clash in a confrontation that would determine the fate of more than one reality. Until that day came, the galaxy far, far away would continue its eternal dance. The Empire would grow stronger, more oppressive, building weapons that could destroy planets and crush entire civilizations. The rebellion would grow bolder, more desperate, sacrificing everything in the name of a freedom that seemed increasingly impossible. And somewhere in the vastness between dimensions, Captain James T. Kirk would continue his mission of exploration, carrying with him the memory of a galaxy in chains and the hope that one day, somehow, it would break free. That hope was enough. It had to be enough. Because in the end, hope was all that any of them had. Hope and the unshakable belief that the stars themselves bent toward justice, even if it took 1,000 years, even if the cost was more than anyone could bear, even if the galaxy far, far away seemed lost forever to darkness, hope remained, and where hope remained, anything was possible.